The evolution of American public transportation before cars, a forgotten journey that built a nation. The day the city learned to move. On a fog-heavy morning in 1827, as church bells echoed through the narrow streets of New York City, something extraordinary rolled forward, not with smoke, not with an engine, but with the quiet rhythm of hooves on stone. A long, yellow-painted carriage stopped at the corner of Broadway and Reed Street. The driver called out a fixed fare, 6¼ cents. Ordinary people climbed aboard, clerks, widows, seamstresses, immigrants who had arrived with nothing but hope. For the first time in American history, transportation was no longer a privilege of the wealthy. It was becoming a public right. No one that morning realized they were witnessing the beginning of a revolution that would shape cities, economies, social classes, and even racial boundaries, long before the first automobile ever appeared. This is the forgotten story of how America learned to move. Before wheels ruled the streets, 1607 to 1800. Before rails, before schedules, before tickets and transfers, America moved at the speed of muscle, wind, and patience. Colonial America, a nation on foot. In the 17th and early 18th centuries, public transportation in America did not exist in any organized form. Cities were small, roads were terrible, most people walked. If you lived in Boston in 1700, your world extended no more than a mile or two from your home. Markets, churches, taverns, all clustered tightly together. Distance defined class. The wealthy lived close to commerce. The poor lived where land was cheap and walking was long. For longer journeys, colonists relied on ferries across rivers, stage wagons for goods, coastal sailing vessels between port cities. Travel was slow, dangerous, and deeply uncomfortable. A trip from New York to Philadelphia could take 3 days or more, assuming no storms, breakdowns, or bandits. There were no schedules, no guarantees, no public oversight. Transportation was not a system, it was a gamble. The first shared transport, ferries and flatboats. America's first public transportation success story floated rather than rolled. Ferries became essential in cities divided by water: New York, Philadelphia, Charleston, and Boston. Privately operated but publicly relied upon, ferries were often regulated by colonial governments, setting fares and routes. By the mid-1700s, the Brooklyn-Manhattan ferry carried thousands weekly. River towns along the Hudson and Delaware depended on flatboats. Ferry operators became early transportation entrepreneurs. These were among the first moments when Americans accepted a radical idea. Movement could be shared, regulated, and priced for the public good. Stagecoaches, the birth of scheduled travel. The real transformation began in the late 1700s with the arrival of stagecoaches. In 1756, a stagecoach line began operating between New York and Philadelphia on a regular schedule. This was revolutionary. For the first time, departure times were announced, fares were fixed, routes were standardized. Stagecoaches connected cities, villages, and eventually entire regions. Taverns became informal terminals. Roads slowly improved, not for comfort, necessity. Yet stagecoaches were not democratic. They were expensive, uncomfortable, dangerous. Only merchants, officials, and the upper middle class could afford regular use. The poor still walked. Still, something critical had changed. America had tasted the power of organized mobility. The horse car revolution, 1800 to 1860. When cities grew faster than legs could carry, by 1800, American cities were exploding. New York's population doubled between 1800 and 1820. Philadelphia, Baltimore, and Boston followed closely. Factories rose, jobs concentrated, housing spread outward. Suddenly, walking was no longer enough. Workers needed to travel miles every day, twice. This crisis gave birth to one of the most overlooked inventions in American history, the horse-drawn omnibus. The omnibus, public transit, is born. In 1827, New York introduced the first horse-drawn omnibus, a large carriage that followed a fixed route and charged a fixed fare. It was slow, it smelled, it bounced violently on cobblestones, but it changed everything. For the first time, anyone with a few coins could ride. Routes served working-class neighborhoods. Cities began to expand outward. The omnibus created the first true commuters, and with commuters came a new idea. Time mattered. Rails in the street, the horse car takes over. Omnibuses had a flaw: friction. Horses struggled to pull heavy carriages over rough roads. Engineers found a solution: steel rails embedded in streets. Thus was born the horse car. Advantages were dramatic. One horse could pull 3 times the load. Rides were smoother. Operating costs dropped. By the 1850s, New York had hundreds of miles of horse car tracks. Boston, Philadelphia, Chicago followed. Private companies competed fiercely for routes. Horse car companies reshaped cities, sometimes corruptly. Political bribery determined routes. Entire neighborhoods rose or declined based on track placement. Transportation was no longer just movement, it was power. A dark truth: segregation on wheels. Public transportation reflected American society, its progress and its cruelty. In many cities, black passengers were forced to ride on platforms. Women faced harassment. Immigrants were mocked and excluded. Abolitionist Frederick Douglass famously fought segregation on streetcars, sometimes being forcibly removed. Public transportation became a battleground for civil rights decades before the automobile era. Steam, speed, and the railroad shock, 1830 to 1870. While horses ruled cities, something thundered across the countryside: steam. The railroad did not just change travel, it rewired American consciousness. Before railroads, distance meant isolation. Time was local. After railroads, cities synchronized clocks, markets unified, the nation shrank. Railroads enabled suburban living, daily long-distance commuting, massive urban growth. Suddenly, living 10, 20, even 30 miles from work was possible. America had entered the age of speed without cars. Cities that climbed the sky, elevated railways, 1860 to 1890. When streets could no longer breathe. By the 1860s, American cities were choking. Horse-drawn streetcars clogged narrow roads. Manure piled up by the ton. Noise, disease, and congestion threatened to stall urban life entirely. In New York City alone, more than 150,000 horses worked the streets daily, each producing waste that overwhelmed sanitation systems. Cities faced an impossible question: how do you move millions of people when the ground is already full? The answer came from above. The birth of the L. In 1868, New York City unveiled something that felt almost unnatural: an elevated railway built above city streets. Iron columns rose from sidewalks, tracks stretched overhead, trains roared across neighborhoods, casting moving shadows over shops and homes. People called them L's. At first, the public was terrified. Buildings shook, sparks flew, noise was constant. But the benefits were undeniable. For the first time, trains avoided street congestion. Travel times were cut in half. Entire new districts became reachable. An office worker could now live miles away and still arrive on time. The sky changed society. Elevated railways reshaped cities vertically. Downtowns grew denser. Outer neighborhoods expanded. Land values skyrocketed near stations. Entire communities formed around L stops. Businesses followed riders, housing followed rails. But the L had a dark side. Neighborhoods beneath the tracks suffered. Reduced sunlight, constant noise, falling property values. The L created urban winners and losers, a pattern that would repeat throughout American transportation history. Chicago and the Loop. No city embraced elevation like Chicago. By the 1890s, Chicago's elevated rail system formed a complete loop around downtown, the famous L. It wasn't just transportation, it was an identity. Chicago became faster, taller, more industrial. The L allowed workers from distant neighborhoods to flood downtown daily, powering America's second-largest economy. Public transportation had become the backbone of urban capitalism. The cable car, power beneath the street, 1873 to 1900. San Francisco's impossible problem. San Francisco faced a challenge no other city had. Its hills were brutal. Horses slipped, collapsed, and died hauling streetcars up steep grades. Entire routes were unusable. Accidents were frequent. The city needed a miracle. That miracle arrived in 1873. Andrew Halliday's Underground Revolution. Engineer Andrew Halliday proposed a radical idea: move the power underground. Instead of horses pulling cars, a continuously moving steel cable would run beneath the street. Streetcars would grip the cable when moving and release it to stop. The first cable car climbed Clay Street successfully. People cheered. Horses were spared. The impossible became routine. Cable cars go national. Cable car systems spread rapidly. San Francisco, Chicago, New York, Philadelphia. They were faster than horses, cleaner, and ideal for hills. But they were expensive. Complex machinery, constant maintenance, massive power stations. Still, for a brief moment, cable cars represented the peak of pre-automobile urban technology. Then came electricity. The electric streetcar age, 1880 to 1920. The spark that lit America. In 1888, in Richmond, Virginia, engineer Frank J. Sprague demonstrated a fully electric streetcar system. It worked flawlessly. No horses, no cables, no smoke, just quiet, reliable electric motion. Cities noticed immediately. The electric streetcar explosion. Between 1890 and 1910, over 45,000 miles of streetcar track were built. Nearly every American city installed electric trolleys. Ridership soared into the billions. Streetcars were cheap, frequent, predictable. They transformed daily life. For the first time, working-class families could live far from factories and offices. This gave birth to something revolutionary: the streetcar suburb. The first American dream. Developers built housing along trolley lines, single-family homes, small yards, quiet streets. Commuting became normal. The American dream, home ownership outside the city center, was born on steel rails, not highways. Private companies, public dependence. Most streetcar systems were privately owned. They promised low fares, frequent service, but profits were thin. Governments regulated fares, often freezing them for decades. Inflation rose, costs climbed, systems deteriorated. Public transportation had become essential, but not sustainably funded. A fatal contradiction had emerged. The warning signs before the fall. By 1915, American cities possessed dense streetcar networks, elevated railways, suburban rail lines. Public transportation was at its historical peak, yet cracks appeared: overcrowding, aging infrastructure, political interference. And then, quietly at first, something new rolled into town. It did not replace public transit immediately. It did not seem dangerous. It was marketed as freedom. The automobile. The lie of inevitability, when cars did not win, 1900 to 1925. The moment everyone gets wrong. Most Americans believe cars conquered cities because they were simply better, faster, more convenient, more modern. That belief is wrong. In 1910, at the height of the streetcar era, public transportation dominated American life. Streetcars carried over 10 billion passengers annually. More than 90% of urban trips were made without cars. Many families didn't even consider owning an automobile. Cars were loud, unreliable, expensive, and often banned from certain streets. They were not inevitable. cities already worked. By the early 20th century, American cities were masterpieces of transit-oriented design. Homes clustered near trolley lines, shops and schools within walking distance, downtowns connected by L's and subways. Children walked, workers rode, cities breathed. Traffic jams existed, but they were caused by streetcars and wagons, not cars. Public transportation was the default, not the alternative. The first automobile panic. When cars increased in number, cities did not welcome them. Newspapers called automobiles mechanical monsters, instruments of death. Pedestrian fatalities skyrocketed. Children were killed in streets once considered public spaces. Cities responded by imposing speed limits, requiring drivers to stop for pedestrians, banning cars from parks. The street belonged to people. Who fought back? Car makers did. They launched advertising campaigns that reframed streets as spaces for vehicles. They blamed pedestrians for accidents, coining a new insult, jaywalker. Public opinion shifted, not naturally, but strategically. How public transit was pushed aside, 1920 to 1945. The financial trap. Streetcar companies were doomed not by technology, but by economics. Fares were frozen by law. Costs rose with inflation. Maintenance was deferred. Tracks aged. Cars wore out. Service declined. Meanwhile, roads were publicly funded. Streetcars paid for track maintenance, vehicles, power. Cars paid almost nothing. The playing field was never fair. The buyout era. During the 1930s and 1940s, a quiet transformation occurred. Streetcar systems were purchased, dismantled, and replaced by buses. Some were legitimately struggling, others were deliberately destroyed. While the full extent of corporate involvement remains debated, one truth is clear: transit decline was a choice, not fate. World War II, transit's last golden moment. Ironically, World War II revived public transportation. Gas rationing, tire shortages, factory commuting. Streetcars and subways carried more riders than ever before. Cities proved once again that they could function without cars. But after the war, priorities changed. The world that almost was. By 1945, America stood at a crossroads. It already had dense cities, efficient transit, walkable neighborhoods. It could have had modernized streetcars, expanded subways, invested in rail-based growth. Instead, it chose something else: highways. But that is another story, one that begins after the age we are exploring. What history forgot. Before cars, America moved collectively, built cities for people, understood transportation as a public good. Public transportation was not primitive, it was sophisticated, efficient, and humane. The automobile did not replace a failure, it replaced a success. Cities built on steel, everyday life before cars. A morning in 1905. Imagine waking up in Cleveland in 1905. You step outside, the street is alive, but not chaotic. A streetcar glides past every 5 minutes. Children walk safely to school. Shopkeepers sweep sidewalks without fear of speeding vehicles. You board a trolley, exchange a nod with familiar faces, and arrive downtown exactly on time. No parking, no traffic jams, no isolation. This was not nostalgia. This was normal. Public transit as social glue. Public transit did more than move people, it connected lives. On streetcars, factory workers sat beside lawyers. Immigrants learned English from neighbors. News spread faster than newspapers. Transit was one of the few truly shared American spaces. Cities were not divided by income as sharply as today. Distance did not mean exclusion. Where rails went, opportunity followed. Women in mobility. Before public transit, women's movement was restricted. Streetcars changed that. Women could work farther from home, shop independently, participate in civic life. The suffrage movement relied heavily on public transportation. Meetings, rallies, and organizing depended on cheap, reliable transit. Freedom rolled on rails. Immigrants and the American entryway. For millions of immigrants, public transportation was their first lesson in America. You learned where jobs were, how cities worked, how society mixed. Streetcars turned strangers into neighbors. Without them, the American melting pot would never have melted. The silent architecture of transit cities. Cities designed for people, not machines. Before cars, urban design followed transit logic. Narrow streets, dense housing, mixed-use neighborhoods. Every city was a 15-minute city before the term existed. You didn't need a car because everything you needed was close. Transit shaped architecture. Stores on ground floors, apartments above, stations as community centers. Cities felt intimate, even when they were large. Time was human. Before automobiles, time was shared. Streetcars ran on schedules. Everyone moved together. There was no road rage, solo commuting isolation, endless congestion. People waited together, complained together, arrived together. Movement was social. The cost we don't measure. When cars replaced transit, something invisible was lost. Accidental conversations, neighborhood familiarity, shared responsibility. Public transportation created collective memory. Cars erased it. The last echoes of a forgotten world. The tracks beneath the asphalt. Even today, traces remain. Beneath modern streets, abandoned rails, buried stations, ghost platforms. In some cities, streetcar tracks still surface after heavy rain, steel reminders of a different future. Why this history matters now? As modern America struggles with traffic congestion, climate change, and urban loneliness, the past whispers solutions. Not new technology, not futuristic inventions, but ideas America already perfected before cars. Saturday evenings were rituals, families dressed up, streetcars filled with laughter, downtowns sparkled with life. Transit didn't just move workers, it moved joy. The psychology of shared movement. Why riding together changed behavior. People behaved differently on streetcars. Less aggression, more patience, greater awareness. Movement was communal. You were not anonymous behind glass and steel. You were visible. The lost skill of waiting together. Waiting was part of life. Platforms became social spaces. Stations became landmarks. When cars removed waiting, they also removed shared time. What engineers understood that politicians forgot. Transit as a system, not a product. Early transit engineers designed cities as systems. Routes complemented housing. Schedules matched work patterns. Capacity anticipated growth. Cars ignored systems. They promised individual freedom but delivered collective paralysis. The ultimate irony. America did not abandon public transportation because it failed. It abandoned it after it succeeded. Cities had already been built. Movement had already been solved. The long shadow of what came before. Why the past still shapes the present. Modern cities still follow old rail lines. Property values rise where streetcars once ran. Even highways often follow former trolley corridors. The past never disappeared. It was paved over. A final reflection. If you listen closely in older American cities, late at night, you can almost hear it. The bell of a streetcar, the rumble of steel wheels, the sound of a city moving together. Before cars, America was already in motion, and it knew exactly where it was going. A conductor's bell, voices from the streetcar era. All aboard, a working man's world. In 1902, Thomas O'Reilly awoke before dawn in St. Louis. He was a streetcar conductor. His uniform was pressed. His cap bore the insignia of the company. By 5:30 a.m., he stood on the rear platform of a trolley, bell cord in hand. Each ring of the bell meant responsibility. Streetcar conductors memorized routes by heart, managed crowds, enforced etiquette. The rhythm of the day. Morning cars were quiet. Workers stared ahead, lunch pails in hand. Evening cars were alive. Stories, laughter, arguments, music. Transit reflected the emotional rhythm of the city. Children knew the sound of approaching trolleys the way later generations knew engines. They counted cars, memorized schedules, rode alone at young ages. Independence came early. A 10-year-old could navigate the city safely. Parents trusted the system. Education on wheels. Streetcars taught punctuality, courtesy, geography. You learned your city by riding through it. Maps were lived experiences, not abstractions. Sunday, the sacred transit day. The slowest day of the week. Sundays were different. Cars ran less frequently. Streets felt softer. People dressed better. Transit was part of ritual. Church trips, family visits, park outings. Streetcars carried not urgency, but intention. Parks, beaches, and escape. Transit companies often built amusement parks, picnic grounds, beaches, at the end of lines. Why? Because public transportation wasn't just about work, it was about life. When the bell fell silent, the first line to close. In many cities, people remember the day their local streetcar stopped. No ceremony, no farewell, just buses replacing rails, steel removed overnight. A sound disappeared forever. Communities felt it first. Businesses near stops declined. Elderly residents struggled. Children lost independence. The loss was subtle but deep. Memory versus progress. It had to happen, they said. When streetcars vanished, people were told it was progress, but older residents knew better. They remembered reliability, familiar faces, predictability. Progress felt lonelier. The last ride. A scene repeated across America. A final streetcar decorated with ribbons, crowds waving, conductors in tears, someone ringing the bell one last time. The future arrived, but something human stayed behind. What the automobile could never replace. Cars gave speed. They never gave shared experience, community rhythm, collective responsibility. Transportation did. The lesson beneath the story. This history is not about technology, it is about values. Before cars, America believed movement was shared, streets were collective creations, transportation shaped society. Those beliefs built a nation. A quiet ending. Late at night in an old American city, rain falls. A patch of asphalt sinks slightly, and a steel rail glints beneath. History does not disappear. It waits. The moment America turned the wheel. Not with noise, but with paperwork. America did not abandon public transportation with a dramatic crash. There was no single vote, no public funeral, no nationwide debate. It happened quietly. A zoning change here, a road budget there, a transit line temporarily replaced by buses. The streetcar age did not end in protest. It ended in paperwork. The subtle redirection of dreams. In the early 20th century, advertisements changed. Posters no longer showed families boarding trolleys. They showed empty roads and solitary drivers. Freedom was redefined, not as access, but as escape. The city that forgot to walk. Distance became normal. As transit declined, cities stretched. Homes moved farther from work. Shops clustered into distant centers. Daily life required machines. What was once a short ride became a long drive, and slowly, invisibly, dependency replaced choice. The cost measured in silence. The loudest loss was not noise, it was silence. No bells, no platform conversations, no shared pauses. Cities grew quieter and lonelier. When the past returned as a question. The 21st century crisis. A century later, America faced familiar problems: congestion, pollution, inequality, isolation.